Well, thank you so much, everybody, again for joining us today for the demonstration of Sage Intacct. For starters, what we'll do are a few introductions, and then we'll go ahead and jump right in. But for introductions, Taylor, maybe if you would be so kind and start it off with an introduction, and I'll do the same, and we'll get started.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Mike. Really nice. Be able to jump on today. I see we've got some people from a few different companies here with us. Really excited to dive into the webinar. Just as an intro to myself. So again, Taylor Magnus. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. Background is primarily in public accounting, audit specifically. It's pretty financial reporting heavy. From there, I worked as a senior accountant for a while before ultimately deciding I really wanted to get in on the system side of things. And so I came to Sockeye, and I was actually on the delivery and implementation side. So I was helping customers move over from whatever their previous accounting solution was over into Intacct. But more recently, I've moved into it's a little more of a pre-sale role. And as part of that, I get to run demos and talk workflows and kind of what the system can look like for our customers as they move over into Intacct. But I'll hand it back to you, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate that introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Michael, Senior Account Executive here at Sockeye. So I really just specialize in working with construction and development organizations and introducing them to the Sage Intacct construction product. So I'm going to take us through a few items here at the beginning, just to introduce who we are here at Sockeye for those of you that don't know, and then a couple of key points on Sage Intacct, the actual system itself, and then we'll jump right into the demonstration where Taylor will lead us here today through the system. And as we're going along here throughout the webinar, please feel free to chime in the chat. I will be monitoring those as we go throughout, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So first off, as an introduction, Sockeye has been around since 2007. And again, we primarily focus on serving construction and development organizations with the Sage Intacct product. Today's demonstration will primarily be focused on developers. However, there will be many parts that are applicable to many construction organization types. And kind of through our clients' feedback over the years is how Sockeye has become a Sage Intacct Platinum partner. As a refresher to some, and maybe new to others, the way that Sage goes to market is through business partners that have specific industry expertise. And so, once again, as mentioned previously, our area of specialty is in the construction and development space. Furthermore, we utilize the Sage software, of course. However, we take you through the process, from start to finish, from handling, initial discussions and demonstrations, all the way through implementing the system and supporting you and your team and how to use it as well. Now, it's also our core focus, of course, to build partnerships, which our business model speaks to very well, which I'll highlight in a bit, but also to be automation experts. So we've got a team here that's full of software consultants, software developers, former CPAs, and project managers, all on hand here at Sockeye to ensure you have all the resources you need in order to be successful on your new instance of Sage Intacct. And we know in today's day and age that it is absolutely critical to be a forward-thinking organization and to really lean into the new technology that Sage is releasing for our customers, which is why we have that very in-depth team. All right, next are a couple of key points on Sage Intacct, the solution itself. So first and foremost, Sage Intacct is absolutely a modern cloud-based accounting system, which means, of course, a variety of things. But at the top of the list, it means that you can access the system from any device and anywhere, so long as you have, an internet connection. Additionally, with Sage Intacct, everybody is always on the latest and greatest version of the system. So Intacct rolls out 4 new releases per year, which update automatically, just like your iPhone updates or just like Netflix updates, on a weekly basis with new movies. Intacct is doing that same thing on a quarterly basis with new features and functionality and automation. So these aren't just, small things that they may be fixing within the system. The goal of these releases is for continuous improvement within the Sage Intacct product. Second, here are the real-time dashboards and reports, which Taylor will lean into and dive into in depth here at the beginning of the demonstration. These include multi-entity capabilities, which I know are critical for developers in terms of consolidations, and automated intercompany transactions as well. And then third here is the scalability of the system. So we know that many organizations evaluating new software platforms are evaluating them due to outgrowing their current solution or have plans to grow and need something that's just a bit more robust. And one of my personal favorite parts about Intact is its ability to grow and scale with your organization, no matter how large it gets or how much volume you're doing. We'll see companies that are sometimes doubling and even tripling in size and won't have to add on any headcount to their accounting and finance teams just because of a lot of the automation and efficiencies that exist within the system, which we'll certainly demonstrate to the best of our capability here today. And then lastly here are Sage Intacct's deep integrations with other best-in-class software providers. So Sage has something that's called the Sage Intacct Marketplace, which shows the hundreds of other solutions out there that they have pre-built connections with. So there's a variety of solution types out there, as you'd imagine, from project management systems, payroll systems, CRM solutions, time and expense systems as well, among many, many more. Right. Now, we think it's extremely important, and Sage does as well, for growing organizations to select a software that has a forward thinking approach. And Sage has already implemented AI in various areas of the system, as an example, AP automation. And as noted previously, in those quarterly releases, are consistent updates that have artificial intelligence behind them. Last thing is what you see up on the slide here is a bit of a sneak peek. A few months ago, Sage announced the early adopters for what's called Sage Copilot. And essentially what Sage Copilot is a generative AI productivity assistant, that allows you to really automate complex tasks, and it can give you personalized advice and, other proactive recommendations that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have thought of. And so the tool, of course, just like other artificial intelligence platforms, will get better the more and more you use it. As an example, you can ask it things like, can you send out all outstanding invoices for X project? Or please pay supplier X or, the month of February. So again, this doesn't have a release date in Intact quite yet, but just on the note of continuous improvement, these are the things that Sage is doing and investing in. Right now, lastly, just wanted to highlight one of our customers who's a developer, just to give you a real life example. So Hoffman and Associates is a commercial real estate developer that has done over 75 plus commercial developments across multiple property types. And Hoffman was previously on Sage 300. And with their growth that they were experiencing, they needed a system that had better multi-entity capabilities and better reporting, and just a faster solution overall that was based in the cloud. So that's exactly when they decided to make the change to Sage Intacct Construction with Sockeye. And so the results, there were many things that kind of yielded itself when they made the switch to Sage Intacct, and efficiencies and things of that nature. But the main things that they highlighted were they had more automated AP workflows, they had stronger custom reporting capability and being able to kind of slice and dice data as they needed on the fly, along with the very flexible multi-entity structure that is provided within the Sage Intacct platform, again, among many other benefits. All right. Now I will go ahead and hand it off to Taylor to jump into the demonstration.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I will get my screen shared out. Kick off. And Mike, if you could just confirm for me if we're looking good. You see my screen?
Yep. All good.
Fantastic. All right. Well, before we kick off, guys, just like Mike said, really encourage any questions you guys have. You can put them into the chat. I know Mike will be monitoring those. As far as how I typically run these is I'll take us through just a quick navigation overview to get us kind of oriented within the system. And then we'll come back into the dashboards and reporting and then out into the transactional side of things. But I will kill my camera. Just guys can focus on content here and we'll dig in. So coming into the system right now, we are sitting at a dashboard. I've elected to make this my landing screen of sorts. Every user within the system can define where it is within the system that they want to be dropped into every day. But the first thing I'm going to call out is up here at the top left. And so this is what we call our entity dropdown. And it's from here that I can do a few things, really. I can toggle between all of my available entities. But what you'll notice right away is that we're sitting at something we call the top level. And so what that means for us from a accounting and reporting perspective is that one, I can look at consolidated real-time reporting across all those entities. I can also transact across all those entities at this top level. So if I wanted to take a bill and allocate that out to 2, 3, 4, 5 different entities, all from the same bill screen, I could do that. We also have records that can be essentially created at this top level and then shared across those entities. And so that might be a project or a customer or a vendor, right, that we can reuse across those entities and be shared from this top level. And then finally, we do have some intercompany automation as well, which is obviously pretty big with our developers, right? And essentially the way that works from a high level is that during implementation, we are defining our intercompany mapping so that when we have activity that crosses entity lines, we can automate those due to, due from bookings so that we are kind of alleviating the bottleneck, right? Both on the front end where a user would traditionally have to go in and get those things reflected manually, as well as the back end, right? When we're talking about a month end close process, right? Where we're having to do all of our reconciliations, and then anybody within the development space knows what a great time it is to chase a variance in your due to, due from accounts at month end on that rec if we're missing something. And so we will actually most often actually disallow direct postings to those due to from accounts just to eliminate that possibility of falling on a balance. But once I'm ready to jump into one of these entities, I can come down, I can click on one, it will open up a new tab for me. And then given that it's a web-based system, right, I can pretty quickly right click that tab. I can duplicate it. I could have a bill up on one screen and a report up on the other. I could be working within one application, within one tab, and another application within another. And when I'm ready to jump into an actual application, I'm going to come here. And so this is my application pull down. And from here, I can toggle between these different applications. But if I come in and I double click on any of these, it's going to bring me to something we call our workbench. And so as you can see, it's just kind of an icon-based approach to what a typical workflow might be, or the most commonly used areas might be within that particular application. But if I were to come back into that dropdown and we're looking at accounts payable, it's here that we can see, excuse me, guys, it's here that we can see that full comprehensive list of that functionality that lives within each individual application. But a lot of these things we're just not using every day. Like 1099s here, right? It's probably the best example in this US-based sales demo environment. This is a once a year function, right? We just don't need that to be on the forefront of what we're looking at. Now, the next thing I'll call out are these little star icons. I can toggle these on and off. Essentially, all I'm doing there is just creating my own kind of personalized favorites list here. Typically, users are touching the same 10, 15, maybe 20 areas of the system each and every day, so they can build that out for themselves. And the last thing here are these little plus icons. You'll see these all throughout the system. So if I were to click on vendors, for example, it would bring me to my vendors list. But then if I click on that plus icon, it's essentially just a shortcut for us right to that record creation screen for whatever record type it is that we're trying to work with. And the very last thing before we jump back to the dashboards and reporting, it's just something I like to call out early in regards to security and permissions. The system is a role-based system. All that means for us is that when we are bringing on a new user, right, rather than having to build out user-specific security permissions and settings, we are defining what we call roles. And it's at the role that we define those permissions, then we assign those roles to users. And so say we were bringing on an AP clerk, I only wanted them to see maybe cash management and accounts payable here. I could assign that AP clerk role. The rest of these modules or applications would drop out of view for that user. And then it gets really, really granular within the actual applications themselves as far as what it is we want to allow them to see and touch and interact with. And now let's jump back into our dashboards, start talking reporting. So as we come into, actually I come back to the top level, as we come into this dashboard, there's a number of different elements here. Really, these dashboards are essentially just a conglomeration of different charts and graphs and maybe metrics that we pull in, maybe approvals that we want to have on a specific dashboard, but we can have as many of these dashboards as we want. And so what that means is that we can custom tailor these dashboards to, it could be by entity, it could be by department, it could be by location or individual user. If we wanted a controller or a PM to have their own personal dashboard with their 5 favorite reports and maybe their approvals outstanding, right? That could be something that we build out. And if I want to add an element to one of these dashboards, I can just come over here to this plus icon. It brings me to this screen. I've got different groupings of essentially component types here. So in my general grouping, I can pull in a billboard or a calendar or main shortcuts. If I go into my reports, I'll see I essentially have all the reports that we've built out in the past. So those reports are essentially just living in this reports area here, but then we're electing to bring them into this particular dashboard.
Hey, Taylor, I do have a question in the chat. So the question is, are we able to have different filters than what's showing at the upper right-hand corner? I think they're alluding to the all departments, all locations. Are you able to have different filters there?
Sure. Yeah. That's whoever that question came from has my itinerary. That's exactly where I was going. Yeah, we can swap these out. So these are just the filters that I elected to pull into this particular dashboard. And so that was just based on kind of the reports that I have in here and the ones that I felt were most useful. Those dashboards, we can define which filters it is that we want to pull in.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, I mean, I'll start here. We'll just talk these over really quickly. I do have a number of these filters. I've got a date filter here. I've got a department filter I could use. I've got locations that could represent entities. It could represent physical locations. It could represent groups of physical locations. If I wanted to say filter down and look at profitability by region, for example, we could do that. I also have this jobs or projects filter here. And I think this one does a good job kind of highlighting what it is that we can do with these filters and on this dashboard. And so with this jobs filter, I could filter down by an individual project or maybe development type. I could filter down by an individual PM if I wanted to. So if I came in and I grabbed up Dennis, for example, and I hit apply. So this entire dashboard is then going to re-render for me. And so I think that this is the best point in the demo once this loads up for me, hopefully. There we go. Just wants to make me look bad mid webinar. But once this loads up, so I think this is the best point, as we're kind of talking about these filters, to step back for a second and talk about the dimensional GL within Intacct just a little bit. And so when we think about older, previous legacy accounting solutions, right? Typically the way that they are capturing and achieving granularity in a lot of cases is at the chart of accounts level. And so what we see in a lot of cases was this typically a big, massive chart of accounts, right? It was a segmented chart of accounts in a lot of cases where we have a base account, we have sub accounts appended to that. Those sub accounts would essentially represent certain attributes that we're trying to code against and then better break out and analyze within the reporting. So within Intacct, we approach this really differently. We use these things called dimensions. And so these dimensions are essentially just standalone fields at the point of transaction entry. It's a little reductive, but we'll dig into it a little further in a bit. But as we come into this bill, I like to come here because I think it gives a good visual into what it is that we're talking about. And so as we come into this bill, I've got some header level information, right? Date, vendor, bill number, term. But as I come down, I start to see these dimensions and these fields come out into play. And so here I've got a location dimension that can be representative of entities or physical locations. Like I was saying before, we've got our job or project related dimensions here. I've got a department dimension. If I hit show details, I've got more down below. I've got customer, vendor, employee, item, class. And so again, it's here at the transaction level that we're capturing all that detail. And so what that translates to for us is a much more dynamic data set, right? Versus that sort of conventional way of doing things where we were working with more of a flat structure, right? Where all these things were being captured at the GL or the chart of accounts. Now coming back in. And so, kind of tying that little bit up, when we have, say, revenue and cost associated with one of these dimensions, for example, we can run profitability by, maybe it's by community or by development or by project or by project manager. Maybe not so much the case with development, but you could run profitability by piece of equipment, right? So that's kind of what it is that these dimensions are allowing for, is that we can start to slice and dice these things and pivot these things around and look at them from different angles, all while kind of simplifying our chart of accounts, right? Because we eliminate all those sub accounts and we're now working with a unified, simplified chart of accounts where it's just our base accounts and then those dimensions. And so the best way I found to describe this from a kind of a sky high level and also a little reductive, but you can kind of think about all of our transactions and records within Intacct within this giant master Excel file where our rows would essentially represent those records and transactions, and then the columns would represent those dimensions. Or actually, before I include that filter, I will pull up one of these job records. So you notice I clicked on that blue hyperlink. Anywhere we see those blue hyperlink indicates to us an area that we can drill into. And so that might be my open commitments. It might be true costs that we've incurred. But in this case, I've pulled up a job record. And so I can see this is where Dennis was tagged as that project or job manager. So that's what was allowing for that filterability on that dashboard.
Hey, Taylor, I've got a question in the chat, and I think it's stemming from when you talked about having approvals and being able to have an approvals dashboard.
Sure.
The question is, when you're on your dashboard, approving something, are you able to actually see the source document? Is that attached to that approval?
Yeah, it can be. And I'll before we move away from dashboards, I'll make sure we pop into an approvals dashboard just to show you. But yeah, we can drill straight down, whether it was from, maybe it's this information, right? Where I want to dig into some of this cost to date, and I could drill straight down into those source transactions. And if that record within the system has an attachment, I could pull it up. And same thing with approvals. If I have, an area here where I have my approvals laid out and I'm drilling through and approving those, I can go straight into that source transaction. And, while we're already talking about it, so I might as well just pull it up. We'll have this load up. So you'll see, and I need to be at my entity level because that's where my
problem. And the actual documents are able to live within Sage Intacct. So there's an attachments area in kind of link area where you can put the actual attachment and document on the screen. So Taylor's just,
yeah. So this is, Mike's exactly right. I mean, this is my approvals dashboard, or what, example of what one could look like. I could bring one of these elements into a controller dashboard, right? Where maybe it's just our journal entries that the controller needs to look at month end to approve. But if I wanted to come in here, hit that magnifying glass, it would bring me straight to this screen. I could approve a client from here, or I can go straight into that source transaction. In this case, I don't have an attachment, but I'd probably be looking for some kind of supporting reconciliation, right? Or if it was an invoice record that I'm approving, an invoice attachment is our backup.
Thanks, Taylor.
Mm-hmm. Now coming back in, we'll start at the top here and kind of roll down a few of these elements. I have what we call performance cards here at the top. These are essentially just snapshot metrics or KPIs. They can be simple month-over-month comparisons. They could be, metrics, again, that we build out, essentially calculations. We can house and maintain both financial and non-financial data within the system. That non-financial data lives in what we call statistical accounts that we can turn around and incorporate that into some of these metrics here. These new projects and active development projects, right? Those might be examples. Maybe it's square footage, under development, things of that nature we can start to capture and track. But these are interactive as well. So if I were to come in and click on this month-to-date development cost, for example, it would bring up the screen. I can see all those different groupings of what's making up these balances. I could drill into any of those, but ultimately it's these two here that are driving that delta or that change calculation there. I'll talk over a couple of these reports in a second. When I roll down to the bottom, I've got some visual representations of some of this data. Drill down works the exact same way. So if I were to come in and click on this East Ridge Care Center for my AP by project chart right here, again, I can see those supporting balances that are driving that element within that chart or that graph. And I could drill into those source transactions as well. Now, coming back to the top, I do have this project draw overview report where I'm essentially calculating out my available to draw based on my cost to date and total drawn to date. But I like to talk over this report here just because I think it does a good job of hitting on some of the reporting capabilities as well as the drill down functionality. And so, we're looking at this project overview. I've got a pretty simple report overall. It's essentially my active projects or developments here on the left, and then columns that we've elected to pull into this report. All these reports, this is obviously a sales demo environment, right? All these reports are customizable, and I'll jump into the report writer here in just a little bit to give a little preview of it. But all this is, modifiable. It's just a sales demo environment. But if I were to want to do research from this dashboard, and I wanted to say, jump into my open commitments on this Springview development project, I could be brought straight to this screen and drill straight into my source transactions. The alternative, there's actually a couple routes to getting into that. I could click on that job record and come into my purchasing commitments tab, and I can see every single commitment on that project. And so these are all my subcontracts, any POs. But I can start to dig into some of these things. And it starts breaking these things out all the way down to cash out the door. But if I want to, I can drill straight down into these commitment records. And so here, we're now sitting at subcontract 0000001, right? But as I come in, I'll just touch on a few things. So I've got some header level information here, right? I've got date, vendor, job. I come down, I've got a number of fields we can use or not use. A lot of these can be used for kind of internal workflow tracking, as well as populating some of our printed outputs from within the system. As I come down, though, I do like to call this out. This is called Spend Insight. This lives within the various kind of cost and purchasing areas of the system. What it is doing is, in real time, as a user is coding, be it a subcontract or an invoice or even a journal entry, if we're allowing for that validation, it is validating against our established budget for that job. And we can set up at what level we want it to stop. In this case, this was kind of a construction focused sales demo environment, but we could set that validation to stop at our cost code or task or budget line, essentially, right? And with that set up, we can define how it is we want the system reacts when it identifies one of those overages. We can have it just throw a flag or a warning, essentially a banner up here at the top where it says and spells out, which line it is we're over budget on, but that user could be allowed to proceed. The alternative is that we can configure it to put a full stop on that transaction to the point where essentially that user will need to save that record down in a draft form. So they won't lose any of their work, but they'll need to save it down in a draft form, and we will need to get a revision pushed through to that budget before that transaction will be allowed to pass and post within the system. Down here, I also have what we call the collaborate feed. So this here allows users to essentially communicate and collaborate directly on records within the system. And this lives on just about every single record type within Intacct. And so if I wanted to use this, I could tag another user. It looks like I've actually come into this subcontract before. So I could tag Brandon and say, hey, share about this coding. And when I hit share, so Brandon will receive an alert within the system up here in this little text bubble. Brandon will also receive an email with a hyperlink that will bring him directly to this record. And so he's not having to dig around and figure out where this is coming from. He can be brought straight here. He can respond. He can upload a supporting file, whatever that needs to be. I've seen this used across clients, across modules, right? There's a lot of different use cases for it. It could be collection notes on a customer record. It could be some back and forth on a new reconciliation that we're dealing with this month. What that needs to look like or include. Lots of different ways that we can use this within the system. Last few things here. I'm going to keep moving us pretty quickly, but I've got my change documents tab. Any change documents associated with or tagged to this subcontract record, I could have visibility into. My posting details, pretty much exactly what it sounds like, right? It's by where it is in the GL that we're hitting. I can actually see one of those dimensions at play here. So we're coding to our Edinburgh location. And then I've got this history tab. And here, what I can see is one, if we had an approval workflow, I could see the entire kind of flow history for that, who submitted and who approved. I didn't have that running in this instance, but what I can see is every single invoice that has come in against this subcontract. And so all these things are linked back and forth, right? So if I were, say, a PM and we've got one of our subs reaching out, trying to figure out if something's been paid, they could come in here if they have the right user types and permissions and start to do this research themselves, right? They could come into the payment details. Looks great. This one has been paid. There's my check number. There's my posting date for that check. And so we're kind of alleviating that bottleneck, right? Whereas traditionally operations would need to reach out to accounting and finance for some of these answers. And so we can just allow for that, some of that free flow of information.
Hey, Taylor, I've got a question around audit trails,
Sure.
actions within the system.
Sorry.
I just wanted you to tap to it to be able to show it.
Oh, great. Okay.
Questions around the auditability on transactions and what Sage Intacct has to offer there. This is great.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. We do have an audit trail. It's running all the time. It's tracking down to the field that was modified as well as the actual change that occurred, if any.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Last couple of things here. I want to just roll down this dashboard really quickly and show a few of these reports together because I think they give a good visual into what it is I mean when I say we can pivot and manipulate this data. Most of you are familiar with pivot tables, but we can do a lot of that within the system now. And so coming back to this project overview report, again, really simple report, those columns we decided to pull in. I come down, I have taken this report, I've duplicated it with one click, I renamed it, and then I essentially introduced groupings. So these are by region. I should have changed that title there, but we're now grouping by region. I come down, I've done the exact same thing. I've taken this report, I've duplicated it, I've renamed it, and I've swapped my groupings here. Come down a little bit more. I have taken my grouping for Dennis here that was up in this one, and we've now put it into kind of a P&L format. We're now looking at real-time profitability across all of his projects or jobs. And this very last one here, less relevant for developers, obviously. I just wanted to show something a little bit different. We'd been looking at a bunch of project focused reports. Here, I've taken the same P&L format, I duplicated it, and I swapped my dimension focus. And so now, say we were a GC or something along those lines, right? And I was running a couple of jobs for Star Enterprises here. I could see consolidated profitability. And so that's just some of the flexibility of kind of what I wanted to hit on with these dimensions, kind of what it's allowing for. And then when it comes time to actually tweak some of these reports, I said I would jump into the report writer. We can revise straight from this dashboard. Granted, we have the permissions, obviously. We can click on this pencil icon and it brings me straight to the report writer. I can duplicate that report just like we were hitting on. I can make a quick little tweak or revision, and I could actually add that new version or flavor of that report straight to the dashboard. If I come into my rows, I can see this is where it is that I defined, what I wanted my rows to be. I can set my level of detail here. I can expand by another dimension. Come into the columns. We'll see. It's just really intuitive. The flow makes sense. We typically find users pick this up pretty quickly. If I come into my columns, I can add columns to the right, move columns to the right, remove column. I can define my column type here. If I want a budget column here, an actual column here, and a calculation column, calcing out a budget to actual variance, I can do something like that. I've got my budget it is that I've elected to pull in here, my account group. I can expand by dimensions. So say we were looking at a consolidated balance sheet across all of my different entities within the system. I could, within a couple of clicks, come down and essentially expand by location and be looking at my broken out balance sheets across all those different entities within a couple of clicks. And then all the way down to my reporting book that I want to be using, as well as some conditional formatting. And so if there's two takeaways I always hope everybody walks away with in regards to reporting with an Intacct is one, how dynamic and flexible it is. And it's really achieved using those dimensions. And then two, just how intuitive this report writer is. Like I said, we typically find users pick this up pretty quickly. With that, Mike, I'll pause for a second before I move out into the transactional side of things. Any other just dashboard or reporting questions that came across?
No others for now. Appreciate those. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. First place I'm going to just want to quickly touch on AP automation. I know we jumped into a manual bill earlier. It was just kind of an empty blank manual bill. We do have, at least in the US, Canada is slotted for release late this year. But within the US, we do have AP automation. It's essentially using a combination of OCR and AI to take the first pass at the coding on our invoices. And so there are two ways to kick invoices off in this process. I can upload them. I can click and drag to 30 invoices here. These are my accepted file types. Sage also provides us with a monitored email inbox. And so your vendors could send in those invoices to that monitored email inbox, at which point they are brought into the system, similar to the way we're doing this upload. But if I were to jump into one that I brought in, this was one I uploaded to show what this looks like. So one, it comes in draft form. Two, it automatically attaches that invoice copy for us. But coming back to this piece here. So It is bringing it in a draft form. It will never, ever code and post for us. We have to come in and touch this record, at the very least come in and hit post. But that's an important step in the process, right? Because it's at this step that we, as the user, come in to review, that we're allowing the AI the opportunity to learn based on those revisions. And so in this case, this is obviously, again, a sales demo environment. I've never run operational data through here to train this. Typically, it does actually pick up my vendor, so that's strange. But as we're going through and I spot maybe things that it missed or things that it got wrong, didn't grab up my terms, I'll grab up net 30. We're making those revisions, and it's kind of learning as we go. Of course, our terms in a lot of cases are driven by the default terms set up at this vendor, but it's learning with us. And so as these come in, it will attempt to predict our account, our department, and our location. And then it will reuse, if we get the invoice, if there's some consistency as far as number of lines, it will use the other dimension values that we used on the previous bill, based on what line it's looking back at our lines on the previous bill. And then it's going to use those other dimension values that we had used previously. And then the very last thing I'll note on it is it's not just learning from us or our Intacct instance. It's also learning from other customer environments. And so if another customer was on Intacct, was also using this upstream technologies vendor, right? They would essentially, the AI engine is learning from that other customer environment as well. And Sage has actually come out and said that if they see the same invoice format on 3 separate customer environments, they will take what they call a digital fingerprint of that invoice format. And if we have modifications that are unexpected, the system can flag those, kind of indicating to us, depending on what it is that changed, maybe we need to reach out to that vendor, right? Confirm that change, make sure this invoice is legitimate, whatever that ends up looking like, but just kind of an added benefit to that AI feature set.
And Taylor, there was a question in the chat around AP automation alternatives. There are definitely alternatives within the Sage Intacct marketplace to Sage Intacct's own AP automation. Or if you're in Canada and want it, immediately, like Taylor had mentioned, it won't be out until a little bit later on this year. There are certainly a couple of options. Stamply is a good one. Stamply account automation, and Use, which is YOOZ, is another good alternative. Both have tremendous integrations with Sage Intacct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think they've been in that space for a while too, in the AP automation space. They've definitely, it's kind of where they live and breathe, right? Yeah, good question. Okay, from here, I keep this moving, make sure we get through everything. I'm going to come into purchasing. So within purchasing, what I'll say is AP bills is really, in most cases, kind of our simple and in most cases, non-job, non-project related, simply due to the fact that we don't have flows where we can move from order through invoice or subcontract through invoice. We get to, in purchasing, define what these purchasing workflows look like. And so the place I actually like to start when we come into purchasing is a little more on the back end than the configuration, simply because I think this screen gives a good visual into how it is that these things push and flow from step to step. And this is open to us. In a lot of cases, we have some kind of best practice templates that we'll start with for implementation. But as you guys are kind of growing on the system, this can grow with you and be built out. So you'll see here, if I include my inactives, you'll see I've been playing in this demo environment for a long time, right? So these are open for us to kind of define based on what those flows need to look like. And then as we come back to this All tab, so this is really where a user would be living. Where I'll come is into my subcontracts here, just to show what it looks like to push one of these things from step to step. And so we're sitting in our listing of subcontracts here. The first thing I'll call out is a state column. This essentially indicates to us what stage or step this purchasing document is in. Pending is essentially a commitment that we have created, but we've had no activity against. Maybe it's a subcontract with 0 invoice activity against it. If it's partially converted, it's kind of what it sounds like, right? Maybe we've had an invoice or 2, but we still have some of those open committed cost outstanding, and then converted is there's nothing else left to do there. We've invoiced against this entire contract here. But when we receive an invoice against one of these things, I'm going to use this EnviroLogic subcontract 219 as an example. So if we receive an invoice against this, I, as the user, all I need to do is come in. In this case, if I have multiple options as far as what steps this can be pushed to, I would see those. I'm going to use this subcontract invoice step. And what we'll see right away is that all of our coding, both at the header level as well as my lines, pulled over from the original commitment. So I, as the user, I don't need to recode any of this, right? We're coding it when we establish this commitment, and then we are converting invoices off of it. And so the only thing I need to do is come in here, put in my vendor document number, and then mirror up my lines to what it is that we have coming in on that invoice, right? So if they were maybe invoicing is 12/5 this period, to tying back to some of those original reports, this is the step where we are pushing this 12/5 out of our commitments column and into our total cost. And then if I were to come back into the subcontract after posting this 12/5 against it, our original amount was 25,000, right? And now we have 12/5 remaining on it available as an open commitment to be invoiced against.
There is a question around retainage and Intacct's capability to handle it. I think that's stemming from maybe being on the screen there. Would you be able to maybe just show or maybe talk on that workflow a little bit within Intacct?
Yeah. So we have retainage both on the cost side of things as well as the revenue side of things. So less common with developers to need it on the revenue side of things, but it's essentially, it is automatically tracking that retainage or that holdback, and it is holding it in, actually, it's holding it in what is essentially a subledger of its own. So on the, both on accounts payable, right, as well as accounts receivable. And then when we're ready to release that retainage, I would essentially come in here and create a retainage release, at which point it moves out of my retainage subledger and into, if I was in accounts receivable, into my accounts receivable ledger here to receive payment against, or if I was in payables, right, it would move into my bills to pay against once we released it.
Super helpful. Thanks, Taylor. I know we're more on the dev side, but wanted to get that answered. Appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. So last thing in purchasing, we'll just, we kind of touched on just approvals and where those could be accessed from dashboards if we wanted to do it that way. But just to talk about policies, as we saw in that approvals dashboard, there are approvals all throughout the system. We have vendor approvals, bill approvals, payment approvals, time and expense approvals, but within purchasing specifically, I just like to touch on these. These policies are specific to what we call transaction definitions, but they essentially represent workflow steps for us. So we can have totally unique policies on, say, the subcontract. So a totally unique policy on the subcontract versus the invoice that comes in against it, if we were to want to have different policies on those things. And when we want to build these things out, if I come into edit here, this is kind of what our build out screen looks like within purchasing. I've got different options as far as how it is that we set that up. So if we wanted to say, do a PM approvals are step 1, and maybe I want a progressive kind of dollar-based threshold approval for step 2, I can set up those thresholds. Looks like I already have a few here set up. So in this example as a whole, we're saying step 1 is PM, step 2, anything below 5,000, we're fine. We don't need subsequent approval after PM. Anything between 5 and 25, I want 1 level 1 approver. Anything beyond 25, maybe I want 2 level 2 approvers, so on and so forth. And so we can build those things out. You can go up to 10 steps deep here. Obviously, you don't see that done very often, so forever, but we can build these out as kind of as stacked as we want them. Great, we've got about 15 minutes left. The next place I'm going to come is into our jobs or projects module here. And the first place pop into is into our actual jobs listing. So here, the reason I like to come here first is we can see right away that we can define relationships between these records so that we can break out what could represent, a phase or a building or individual units. We kind of decide what level of granularity it is that we want to start tracking some of these things. And then within the reporting, we can report out on these individual sub jobs or at that rolled up parent perspective, right? When we were in that dashboard, everything was rolled up. And then similarly, if we were talking about the construction side, you could invoice at the individual sub job level or at the rolled up parent level as well. But if I come into the project record, I'll just touch on a couple of things here. So I've got a lot of header level information. This is kind of our first step, right? When we are starting a new development project, I would create my project or job record. And then my next step would be to start bringing in my estimates and then building out my buyout on that. But when we come into the project record itself, there's just a few things I would call out. I've got my name, my category, I've got my job type here. We can drive some reporting and some groupings with that. This customer really isn't relevant for a developer in most cases, but I've got, again, an end date. I've got a job status. Within each of these statuses, I can define my allowable transaction types. So if we want to disallow certain transaction types as we're in a certain status, we can build that out and accommodate that. And then here, I like to call these out. So these are actually custom fields on this project record. And so I can, as we identify certain things that we want to start tracking within the system that, perhaps we just don't have a good field for, we can build out custom fields. These are obviously really simple true false checkboxes here. But those can be, date fields, lists of values. I can build these out. These flow through to my reporting. And so these probably took about 60 seconds a piece to build out. And those can we can build those out as we identify them, as you're growing on the system. The next thing I will call out, got a few things here, but this is really what I want to talk over. This dimensions area is where we can set up some default dimensions on these project records in this instance. The reason I like to touch on it is, when we're talking about these dimensions and capturing this data at a much more granular level than we're used to in a lot of cases, a natural question you kind of have to ask is, how is it that we ensure data completeness and accuracy, right? And so there's a lot of different areas throughout the system where we can do that, but this is just a quick and easy one to show. Here on this project record, I can set up my default dimensions. And as we are coding to this project within purchasing, for example, rather than having to fill out all these dimensions on that purchasing record, as soon as I wrap up that job, because I've set these up, these will default in for me, right? So we're not having to worry about missing one of these fields or coding something inaccurately, right? These can auto-populate for me. We can also set up validation for particular accounts, like for required dimensions. The system can throw a flag or warning, let us know that we missed something. We can also set up smart rules where we can disallow for certain coding combinations if we want to, or disallow for certain fields being null. There's lots of different areas throughout the system where we can build out some of that validation for ourselves. From there, we already popped into that purchasing commitments tab. We do have our work breakdown, kind of our estimates, our estimate lines here. Any estimates we have associated with this project or this development. And in that purchasing commitments tab we touched on earlier, we'll pop into these project estimates. We can have multiple of these estimates associated with the same project. So in this case, we do lump forecast kind of into this estimates bucket here, but we can track all that history there. So as we have, historical forecasts, we can keep those within the system and have visibility into some of those changes. So in this case, I've got my current, this might be my original, and then I've got forecasted cost to complete, cost to completion, whatever it is we're trying to capture there. We can maintain all that history. Next thing I'll pop into is our standard cost code catalog. Here we can see that we can build out those relationships, right? It's very similar to the jobs where we can start to group these things within the reporting. I could look at these things at the more granular level, or I could roll it all up and look at it from where that more rolled up perspective for us. And the last thing within this section I'll hit on is we can use this generate invoices function here to pull together a draw request. So we're using functionality that in a lot of cases is used for like time materials billing, but we are building it out and using it in a way that we can pull all of our costs that we need to draw on some of our finance. And so in this case, I do need to be at my entity level here. We come in, draw on cost through 831 in this case. Want to hit preview. What I'll see is that I've got some header level information here. Customer, that might be our bank, right? You call this draw one. Doesn't look like I've had any activity here. But as I come down, what I'll start to see are my costs, posted cost flowing through. And so I've got timesheet entries here. Not something we would typically see on a developer too often, but as I come down, I've also got accounts payable expenses that have been posted. I could pull up that actual bill, review it. As I come down, I've got my order entry. These are purchasing transactions, general ledger transactions. So you could actually draw on journal entry, maybe it's allocations of overhead, all the way down to credit card transactions. And so as you would expect, the user would essentially come in here, deselect anything that we're not going to be drawing on this period. And then anything that we deselect will repopulate for us the next period that we go to put this draw package together. And then this is essentially eliminating the possibility of a double drawing on a cost, right? It's only posted unbilled cost for this period that are flowing through within this screen. And then our output, as far as what this looks like, all of our printed outputs from within the system are essentially just Word documents driven by mail merge fields. So our output is open to us to define. And then we can also have a supporting report that lays out any of those actual to budget versus total draw to date, all those comparisons that go with the typical draw package for us. Mike, I might pause for just a second. Any questions?
No questions coming in. I know we've got about 5 minutes left though. So maybe a good spot to call out. If you do have any, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll certainly get those answered.
Awesome. I think the last thing I'll hit on, I was moving a little fast through the jobs, but last thing I want to hit on was the bank feeds within Intacct. We do have the ability to connect to our financial institutions. And this is also the case, not just for cash accounts, but credit cards as well. We can use our bank feed to establish a connection. And then once that connection has been established, we can have that cleared activity pulled down into Intacct up to once every 6 hours. And then with that activity that we're pulling in, we can set up some rules and automation. So we have two rule types from a high level. So we have a matching rule type. We have a create rule type. With the matching, we're essentially, there's some build out, but we are providing the system with what it is it's going to be looking for within that activity that we're pulling down to help facilitate an auto match for our book and bank transactions. And then the create rule is very similar in that we're going to provide the system with what it's going to be looking for, but going a step beyond, we're going to provide it with the coding that we want it to use every time. So if we have any sort of recurring transaction types, it could be bank fee, finance charge, we can have the system auto draft those transactions for us. So obviously, again, there's some build out there, but the goal is that at the end of the day, we're essentially managing by exception, right? It's only those transactions that do not auto match or auto draft for us that we as the users need to go in and address. And this is obviously, this is pretty big for developers. I know when I was working at a commercial developer here in Austin, we had something, I think we had around 40 entities, which translated to something like 90 cash accounts. We had one person where their entire job was cash activity. We didn't have anything like this on that system that we were on, but I made it through everything I wanted to hit on, Mike. I don't know if there are any other questions or if you want to go ahead and tie us off, but.
Awesome. Yeah. So no other questions at this time, but did just want to wrap it up with, if you do have any other questions or you do ultimately end up wanting to meet and chat further, please feel free to reach out to us. I believe the email was in the webinar invitation. So please feel free to shoot an email over to that, or call into our line as well. I would love to discuss further with you, and really appreciate